The fifth and final tool that we use in SeaPerch is the soldering iron. This tool requires the most amount of practice to truly master. The soldering iron is a tool that gets very hot at the tip that allows us to melt the solder and bond electrical joints. That in itself doesn't sound that complex, but as we get into smaller and smaller devices that we're going to solder together, it requires a little bit of skill. So what we'll do is we'll demonstrate two different types of soldering joints that we use this tool on. And then I recommend that you practice this at home before beginning your SeaPerch build. While we're using our soldering irons, we'll always want to make sure that the tip on our iron is clean. To do that, what we'll do is we'll melt solder onto the tip and then wipe it off using either the sponge or the brass wool, whichever you have. By doing this, we ensure that we always have a nice, hot, shiny tip to our soldering iron, which will make the soldering go much easier. The first joint that we're doing is our attachment of our tether wires to our SeaPerch motor. In this case, we've already prepped the wires and got them set up on the terminal to the motor. So we will take our soldering iron and our solder. The first step is to hold the soldering iron against both the terminal of the motor and the wire. We'll give that 3 to 4 seconds to heat up, and then we'll add the solder. As the joint cools, it will hold everything firmly in place, and that will be our completed solder joint. The second type of soldering we use in SeaPerch is soldering to a printed circuit board. This process is very similar to the process we used on the motors, in that we'll take our soldering iron, place the soldering iron between the component and the board, and let it heat itself up for 3 to 4 seconds. Once it's warm, we'll add the solder, and after everything has had a chance to heat up and flow, we'll remove the iron. With the printed circuit board, before we go and do the next set of joints on that part, we want to make sure that everything is down and flush and in place. It's much easier to adjust one of these switches with only one terminal soldered than it is to do it with all the terminals soldered. Once we're happy, we can go ahead and solder up the rest of those connections. So now I want to go through with you some examples of joints that may cause problems in the operation of your SeaPerch. Right here you can see an example of the first problem, where we have two terminals that are connected with a single piece of solder. This no longer allows the proper circuit to be built and can short out your controller. The other type of problem are incomplete joints. And that is that if you look at it, you have a ball of solder on the post for the switch that doesn't connect to the circuit board. Some of these other joints don't quite have enough solder to the point where you can see openings between the piece of the switch and the circuit board. Each time you go in to repair one of these control boxes or fix some of your bad joints, step 1 is going to be to reheat the joint and get the solder to flow. Step 2, if you need to, use the soldering iron to draw extra solder away. And then when you're done with that, go back and put fresh solder on any joints that need more. Following those 3 steps, you should be able to troubleshoot 95% of any problems you'll find on a control board.